good that you're all here. Normally I talk about my game stuff. I am a game designer. I made some games that you might know of, perhaps Hidden Folks, which was my most successful game. Currently working on Secret Shuffle. And the reason that I'm here to talk today is that Secret Shuffle of Hidden Folks was massively successful for the team and I. And that gave me some spare change. And of course, you start thinking like, oh, I have all this money on the bank account. What do I do with it? And very quickly, I discovered that there's actually quite a lot of funding sources that I could become part of as an investor. And so, inspired by INDIGO Fund, I came up with this thing. First, I joined INDIGO Fund and invested in various games. I think 4 or 5 games. And there were some things I liked about it, some things I didn't like as much about it. But what I did saw was that many of the people that pitched to INDIGO Fund were not coming from the Netherlands. And I did see a lot of Dutch game studios where that funding could actually be a real lifesaver. So, inspired by INDIGO Fund, I came up with Midgame Fund. And so today I want to talk a little bit about how the fund works, also internally. And I want to talk about how the agreement is set up. So I'm going to share some details of the default agreement with you. And then I'm going to also talk about some tips. I wanted to initially show also some of the pitches that we received, but it got really tricky because I don't necessarily want to throw out other people's confidential information. And even if I would have permission from them, a pitch is always a package, right? So if I just show you one tiny piece of their pitch, it doesn't really fully represent what they do. So I'm just going to share tips with you and also direct you at the end, show you where you can find some pitches, some examples of pitches. So let's start with how the fund works. So Midgame Fund is actually a syndicate, which means that Midgame Fund, even though it's called a fund, it's not actually a fund. It's more of a name for a group of people. In this case, these 40-plus investors are all successful Dutch game designers or game developers who've made one or more successful games, or some of them don't necessarily have successful games, but they have, for instance, a lot of experience in a particular field. This is an important fact that will come back throughout this talk of mine, because we really want to make sure that these people are the kinds of people that you want to talk to if you are in doubt about something about your game, or whether you want to find someone in your network but don't have the resources to actually go to events or stuff like that. So the fact that there's a lot of investors that are successful game designers is a very important fact to us. So let me talk you through the whole thing from pitch to money on the bank. It's only a couple steps, actually. First, of course, we want to receive your pitch. There's an email address on the website, pitch@midgame.fund. You send your pitch there. You can go there in 2 ways. Either you send a pitch deck, if you have one, or you just copy-paste some information from the website, fill in the blanks, and we receive that. And just for your information, there's already 2 games out of the 6 or 7 games that we funded that just copy-pasted the stuff on the website and just sent it to us. It was very, very low effort, but again, very successful for these people. So you send us the pitch. First, it's actually received by Martine and I. Martine is my co-organizer for Midgame Fund. And we look at the pitch, and we scan it a little bit, and we figure out whether there's already stuff missing. So, for instance, if there's like clearly something missing about, for instance, the partners that you want to go to, or there's nothing about marketing on there, we'll ask you for those questions. You can either send us a new pitch deck, or we'll just add that to the pitch later. So once we've done that verification process a little bit, we send it. Martine or I sends it to all the investors. We have a Slack group, and we make a specific channel. In this case, I'm going to get very specific so you can all take it into your minds. We make a channel for your game. We throw the pitch deck and all the information in it. And we just leave room for all the investors to discuss your pitch, to look at it, and also say whether they're in or not. And so how that works is, again, we're a syndicate. They didn't put like money in from the start. everyone puts their own money in, and whenever there's a pitch coming in, they can say, oh, I like this a lot, I'm gonna put 5K into this. And then there's another person that says, oh, I love this, I'm gonna put 20K into this. So, of course, part of your pitch is going to be how much money you need. If that amount of money is made, if we're able to fully fund that amount of money with all the offers that the investors have made, we go to the next step. If that doesn't happen, nothing happens. Sometimes, if like a studio asks for 100,000 euros and there's only like offers up till 70,000 euros, we'll talk to the developer, see if it makes sense. Sometimes it happens that a developer asks for 100,000 euros and there's like 150,000 euros available, and then again we go into a conversation with the developer and see whether it makes sense to do that. So once there's enough offers and enough interest, we continue to the next step, and that can go extremely quickly, to the surprise of some. There were, I think, 3 or 4 games that were essentially funded within 3 days. That's a little bit scary sometimes, also for the developer, also for me as the organizer, because it's going very quickly. But basically what happens is I email you saying, congratulations, there's enough interest, and immediately also send the template of the default agreement to you so you can read through it. Again, I'll talk about the agreement in a second. But once we go through it, maybe there's some changes, we'll make those. Then everyone puts their name on the agreement, and we sign it. Investors transfer the money, and you can go and make your game. So that's the whole process from A to Z. And the thing I really want to highlight here is that the bigger the ask, the more investors you're going to need. And that is very inherent to the way this fund works, because everyone for themselves decides whether they want to invest or not. So if you're looking for 20,000 euros and you have a strong business case, it's almost guaranteed you're going to make it. But if you have a strong business case where you ask for 150 euros, you're going to need to convince 15, 20, 25 people. That's already a slightly bigger challenge. So that's a little bit inherent to the way that this fund is set up, and again, something to keep in mind. That said, there have been games that have gotten very large numbers of money, so it's definitely possible. It's just something to keep in mind. Okay, so after you've signed and you're making your game, we ask you to join our Slack. There's a Slack group. All the developers get their own public channel, and so my long-term vision, or our long-term vision of Martien and I, is to create eventually a community of people that help each other, talk to each other, both with the investors and all the developers, because we're all in the same Slack. But Slack is going to be the primary way for you to talk to the investors. So what I usually recommend is treating the investors like you would treat your best friends if you want them to come to your party. So you don't necessarily want to send everyone one message in like a big email or something. You want to go to people directly. So actually the direct messaging features of Slack is probably your best friend in this case. So you talk to the investors a lot through that way. Okay, so that's a little bit of how it's set up. Now let's talk about the agreement, because I think the agreement says a lot about the spirit of Midgame Fund and how it works. I'm not going to cover all the details because a lot of it is just boilerplate. But what we really did try to do was make an agreement that works best for the investors, that works the best for the developers, and of course for us as the organizers, because if it's too hard to set up, I probably wouldn't have done it in the first place. So we tried to make it really fair, and this is sort of what we have come up with. So to keep things very simple, there's an agreement between you as the developer and all the investors that are interested. One agreement, everyone's signatures on it. Technically speaking, it is a loan. And the reason for that is that we're giving you money, but we're not asking you anything in return other than later money back. And fiscally speaking, that's not an investment, because an investment requires you to get equity, something on the other side of this, and that's not really what's happening here. So technically speaking, it's called a loan. I always need to explain this because the first time the developers open up the agreement, they see game development loan, and they're like, what the fuck is this? So it's a loan. One important thing in there is that there's essentially no obligations for the developer. We give you the money, it's investors' risk, and it's on you to make the game. There's even a clause in the agreement that says if you don't release the game, too bad, investors' problem. So there's really no obligations. That's I think the way that we try to make it fair, because the investors are supposed to take the risk. So what's the most important part about this? It's of course the revenue share. So it's a loan. There's no interest on this loan. Instead of the interest, there is a revenue share. And what's important here to note is that the revenue share is based on the revenue that you receive. So for instance, should you work with a partner, say a publisher or another party, they're going to get money, and they're going to give money to you. What a lot of other investment companies or funds or other publishers want is they want to take a piece of the pie at the very start, right? So we're doing the exact opposite. We're taking a piece of the pie of the money that you actually receive on your bank account. So for instance, if you come to Midgame Fund and you ask for 50,000 euros, then you go maybe a year later to a publisher and get another 200,000 euros. That publisher is probably going to want to recoup the majority of that as well. But unless, they want to recoup, but they're going to do that. And we're not even going to be involved in that. So the moment that you start getting paid, that's the idea that we also, or the investors also, are start getting paid. So how does this split work? Well, we have a default, and there's good reason for all these defaults. This is the stuff that we've come up with. What does recoup mean? Recoup means that you've paid back the original investment or the original loan. What we've set as the default is that if you start earning money, please pay us 75% of that until you've actually paid us back. And after that, we think it's fair to ask you for 25% of the revenue until 5 years after release or 6 times the return. Now, a lot of people are actually kind of surprised about the 6 times return. And there's a good reason for this, because there's this other fund, INDIGO Fund, I talked about this. If you go to their agreement, which is publicly available, they actually mention a 2 times return. And this was one of the things that didn't sit with me very well. And the reason for that is a lot of the games that actually get funded, they're almost always sure bets. So what happens is, if the return, if the potential return for an investor is so low, that means that they can only take so much risk. Because if one game does well and one game does not, you're still even, right? So what happens is, indie fund investors are very risk averse. They only do finishing parts. So maybe someone needs another 20, 30,000 at the end because they forgot to budget voiceovers or something. That's a moment where indie fund is really convenient. But that's not just the kinds of games that I would like indie fund to fund. And so I talked to a lot of people, thought about it a lot, and this return thing is where I thought this is where we mitigate investor risk. So just to give you a bit of a picture there, of course, all the investors individually for themselves decide whether they want to invest or not. For some people, it can be quite a lot of money that they put in a game. And so everyone is constantly mitigating risk, like thinking about how much risk am I taking? How likely is it that this game is going to succeed? In the end, it's very likely that half of the games, or even more, don't succeed. And so how do you mitigate that risk? Well, that's what we're trying to do with this 6x. So this 6 times, this 75% pre-recoup, 25% post-recoup, is also something that can be negotiated, but it's not negotiated in a way that everything can go down. You give some, you get some, right? So it's variables we can play with, and we look at this depending on the project and depending on what you need specifically. So that's some of the details, I think, the most important details for the agreement. Now, just to be super clear, these are sort of the things that we set as requirements for the fund right now. So if you may want to get a funding from Midgame Fund, this is the ranges that we're talking about. For some, especially teams bigger than 2 people, 150,000 is probably not going to cut it. And so we still get a lot of pitches for bigger teams and also bigger projects. And usually these kinds of funds are used as a step up. So you want to make this game, you feel confident about it, you can pitch it to some extent, but publishers won't bite. That's where Midgame Fund comes in. or you're already almost at the finish line and you want to use it as a finish fund, that's where Midgame Fund comes in. And there's a couple other scenarios, I think, where it makes a lot of sense to go to Midgame Fund. Of course, you get all these cool investors that have a lot of knowledge and a big network that you can talk to, so I really do believe it is smart money. Right now, we're sticking to teams in the Netherlands. That's also just because I want to contribute to the Dutch game industry, and also I am not ready to moderate pitches from all around the world because it can get really busy, and I already see that at Indie Fund, and there's a lot of countries where there's very little funding options, and so I'm just not ready for that. So we're sticking to the Netherlands right now. This is a very vague thing, like it's not that you actually need to be Dutch people or something. And if like a large part of your team is not in the Netherlands, that's also probably fine. But it's just that we're trying to stick to this right now. We might make exceptions to this at some point. One thing that is necessary is that you at least have a prototype. So we don't want to fund concepts because that's just way too risky. You want to see that at least you've taken the effort to discover what the game is to a certain extent, right? So these are there's actually one more requirement, but it's not super relevant for now. Okay, so let's talk about some tips for your pitch or your pitch deck. These are just common pitfalls. These are the kinds of things that whenever Martine and I receive pitches, almost always contains one of these things. This one, the big one. This is such a common pitfall, and I keep saying it, and everyone keeps saying, I know everyone is just getting tired of this, but I understand that you're mostly passionate about the creative parts of your game. That goes for almost all of us. But business and marketing is extremely important for the investors to take into consideration. So that does not mean that you need everything set out and clear cut from the start, right? That's not how it works. What I think investors do want to see is that you thought about it thoroughly. You know what kind of market you're going to be entering. You've done a bit of research on similar games, for instance. You know what kind of partners you're looking for. You know the kind of tasks that need to happen. And this goes for both business and marketing, right? So we don't want to see plans where it says, and then we're going to release on Steam, full stop. Like that doesn't work. So that's the moment that Martine and I will email you back saying, hey, can you elaborate on your marketing? At the very least, if you're not, again, if you have no idea what you're going to do within this field, this marketing or business field, at least tell us that you have a plan to figure it out and how, or that you know who you want to work with, who's going to figure this out for you. So for instance, you're looking for a publisher and they're going to do all your marketing, then be clear about that, and then maybe elaborate on how you're going to find that publisher. And maybe we can help with that, sure, but it's good if you show that you looked into it. So this is also something that a lot of pitches are lacking, especially the pitch decks, because the copy-pasting on the website, it's the second thing. There's a good reason for it, because there is actually quite a big difference how investors look at a pitch for 20,000 euros and 150,000 euros. So it really changes an investor perspective. So I would say, put this on your first or second slide, like, hey, we're this studio, we are looking for funding for this game, this is how much we need. Now let's talk about all the details, right? So do this early on. So do this. Am I already 24 minutes in?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Okay, I just noticed the timer there. Yeah, okay. So say what type of partner you're looking for. If you come to Midgame Fund expecting that we're going to do marketing for you, that's not how it works. But sometimes some pitches hint to it, so please be very clear about this. Show pretty stuff. It just works. Investors, everyone is very visually interested in your game. If it's pretty, it just works better. I'm sorry, that's how it works. In-game videos usually work, so showing the actual prototype or game. If you have a vertical slice, that makes sense. If you don't, just show concept art. Make it pretty. It really helps. Have a complete budget and timeline. Occasionally, we'll get pitches where it says animator, 30,000 euros. That's perhaps not as detailed as we would like it. A little bit more detail would be nice. At least say how many months or something, like stuff like that. So do this. Keep it short on the gameplay, art, and story. Some pitches tend to be very long on these things, but this is only part of the bigger picture, right? And especially as an investor, we want to look at the things that at everything as a whole. Research similar games, I already mentioned that a little bit. There's a lot of platforms where you can try to figure out, make an estimate of their sales, and show us how you can make it. So, or show us that you can make it. Show us who's in the team, that they have experience. Perhaps they've already made the kinds of games that you're pitching. Yeah, those are my tips for now. Now, before I open up the questions, I want to see perhaps a couple of hands of people who might be interested in funding, not necessarily from Midgame Fund, but just looking for funding in general. Is there who is? Okay, nice, a lot of people. Okay. Please give me questions.
Actually, and who wants to become one of the funders, investors?
Yeah, that's an option. Please talk to me. Yeah,
good
please
question.
Talk to me afterwards.
Because thank you very much. Already an applause, and then we do questions. Yeah. Okay. Because it's maybe I touched no. Because it's really about meaningfulness.
Yeah.
So it's if you follow all the steps, you really make a meaningful question.
Yeah.
That makes so much sense.
Having a good ask. Yeah. Any questions? Yeah. Okay. Let's start with you.
The microphone is coming.
Oh, okay. Microphone.
Since we're recording the whole event, and it will be shown later on Vimeo.
Oh.
So you give a range of the amount that the funding tends to be at. Can you give us an idea of what the median amount is?
I mean, there's only 6 or 7 games that have been funded, so it's a little bit hard to say. Honestly, I think there's 2 things to look at. What do you need? And whether you think that Midgame Fund can provide that with the pitch that you have. Those are, I think, the 2 parameters, more important than what the average or the median is for the investments. But generally speaking, the pitches that we receive have more than 50,000 euros, and we have received pitches for 150,000 euros as well. So, yeah. There was, before we move on to you, there was someone over there. Yes, you?
Yeah.
If you don't have a full team set up when you pitch,
Yep.
Can that be mentioned as well, or do you have to have the full team ready?
You don't need the full team. No. So as long as you have a plan to get the full team, right? And you know exactly which roles you have and what these people are going to do, as long as you can show that you have an idea of that, I think it can still work. Yeah. There was someone, 2 people in the back over there.
So, Adriaan, thanks. I was just wondering, you as an organizer take a lot of time in
Yeah.
Judging those first pitches, but it was never mentioned that Midgame Fund also has a kind of revenue somewhere.
Right, because it doesn't.
Is it just for free?
Yeah, so I did make an investment into setting everything up. So I paid for all the legal fees to set up the agreement. I paid for all the fiscal checks that needed to happen. I made the website and paid the designers for that and all that kind of shit. But that's just an investment on my part because I want this to exist in the Netherlands. Through the games, through Indie Fund, I've already made a profit. So I feel like it makes sense to put that profit now into Midgame Fund. And there's no Midgame Fund games that have been released yet, so fingers crossed that it will go well. But eventually, the profit is only going to go to the people that invest.
Okay.
And there is actually a small fee that we only just now decided to put on the investors. But it's a very small fee. So investors per agreement that they're going to sign, they're going to pay like $50. So it's very little money, but it makes good for the time that Martine or I puts in. Yeah. Okay, well. So it's very much a community thing. The goal is not necessarily to make a lot of money here. The goal is to see if we can at least make money, so that this keeps becoming interesting, keeps interesting for the investors, but it's also still very nice for the developers. So, or actually both, equally nice for both. Yeah.
Well, I think that deserves a round of applause anyway.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, go on.
So can you go a bit more into the process of like, okay, so a game is funded by Midgame Fund and then to go to a publisher, right? How do publishers feel about that? How do publishers interact with that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think what really helps is that we don't intervene with like their revenue things. Like it's really about the revenue that's on your part. But otherwise, I don't really have a lot of data for that. We have signed with at least 3 games that are looking for or have signed with or are in talks with publishers. I haven't heard anything bad from those things, again, because we don't really intervene with the revenue streams. So I don't really have a great, like, solid answer for you. Honestly, I don't think it matters that much because of the revenue stream. Yeah, and we have no creative say over your game. So, I mean, I don't know what
It's
else
like you're
a
not even
publisher
there.
might be worried about. Yeah, it's just a source of funding that probably replaces the kind of funding that you want to put in yourself. Yeah.
All right.
Doesn't that hurt you? No creative say on the game?
No, I don't think, because so the investors, let me be very clear, these investors are extremely busy people. If you sign with Midgame Fund, they will probably never actually come to you and ask you how it's going. The reason for that is that I have a kid now. I just bought a house. I need to do a lot of shit. I have 3 games I need to worry about. I don't have time for that. But if you come to me with specific questions, I can help you and direct you really targeted. And time again, I see that it works. I've connected parties with Apple Arcade people, with Nintendo people. I've given people tips on how to go into a Steam Next Fest and see their, because of the things that I say, see their wish list increase by 30,000 wish lists. So I know that there's knowledge within the investor group. They're very busy people. So that's sort of like, I guess, the deal that you're entering into. Yeah. There was one more question
One more.
here.
Oh,
You.
more.
One second.
Wait for the, please.
Thanks for the elaborate talk,
Yeah, of course.
Adrian. So I had a question. You mentioned 6 games funded.
Yep.
I actually have 2 smaller questions.
Yeah.
One is how many applications did you have at Midgame Fund, and what is there some type of game that you're specifically looking for? Or
We're not specifically looking for a type of game. I do know that the investors, the experience is definitely within entertainment games. So we have had one serious game request that was, I thought, a very good candidate, but there was just not a lot of engagement from the investors because they don't know. They look at this and they're like, this looks great, but I have no idea if it's going to succeed within the serious games business. So probably going to stick to entertainment games, probably also more of the common pathways. So probably business to business not going to work. But in terms of genre, I don't know. I forgot your first question.
how many applications?
Oh, how many applications? I actually don't keep account, but I think it's probably between 20 and 30. So it's not that many. We actually don't receive that many pitches, probably like once every 3 or 4 weeks. But we would love to have more, but I'm not going to also pay for a marketing agency to tell more people about it, because too much investment for me. But yeah, if you pitch there and you have a good pitch, there's a likely chance you actually get funded. Yeah.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah. I don't think we have time for more questions.
No, and but he is still here.
Yeah.
So you can also meet him this afternoon,
Yeah.
or maybe at the door, to continue the conversation, because there are urgent questions
Makes sense.
going like this.
I'd love to answer them. And thank
And
you for being here, everyone.
And thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.